to think about. Wait, I just put it. Where's my? Okay, we are live. Let's take a second. We're gonna take a moment to tweet real quick before we start the conversation. Da, 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 da.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Watch. Join. Okay. So.
Wait. You also tweeted, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, we will have 2 tweets.
No. I just tweeted from my own account.
I see.
Yeah. So, here we are. Let's begin with talk about today. You seemed I guess the word would be well, I guess yeah. Okay, first I have to introduce myself. To anyone who's watching who doesn't know me, my name is Jared. I'm a copy editor for various Ukrainian publications right now, especially the Ukrainians media. I also host an English-speaking club for Ukrainian journalists with the Media Development Foundation. Just got that done a few minutes ago. Vladislav, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Vladislav. I'm social activist and historian of Central Eastern Europe of 19th and 20th century. And usually you could see me speaking about Ukrainian history, Ukrainian social and progressive history. It's in some way blending both my political activities and me as a historian. So today I will be speaking about anniversary of Ukrainian People's Republic, Ukrainian state that was declared 107 years ago as a process of self-determination of Ukrainian people. So, yeah.
But before we get into that, I just, I want to touch briefly on the whole missile danger day that was. You seemed pretty non-pulsed. You were like, what else is new? You were very not intimidated by the news. What was why was that?
Well, because we have such news every day. Like, every day someone would write, like, oh no, danger, ballistic missiles, we're all gonna die. And you hear it, like, for 1,000 days. And it's kind of, you get used to it in any way. And I don't think it's something serious. Especially in Kyiv, it's the most well-defended city in Ukraine.
But I was a little bit worried because it came from the U.S. Embassy. They don't do that every day. So I was like, is this bad?
They do it sometimes.
I don't know. Well,
if there would be nuclear strike, you would notice. So,
I would hope.
And actually,
so.
I checked this 2 years ago. I took like the map. There's like this thing that you could count where the blast radius of nuclear explosion would be, and I kind of dropped in this map in internet like nuclear bomb in the center of the Kyiv, and so it's not that bad. So if you're on the outskirts of the city, you would be like fine, like no big problem.
It depends.
If you're if you're like rich middle class who like lives in the center of the city, then they would. Okay, so I'm just half joking. So
yeah, we are in different. I'm today was a day where I was happy not to be in the center. I think the threat was like some of the rumors was that it was a ballistic missile without like intercontinental ballistic missile, but without a nuclear warhead. And the problem with those is that they're not very accurate because they're designed to carry nuclear warheads. So and accuracy is not really like the main priority when it's for missiles of that type. But regardless, nothing happened. So we can move on to the topic at hand as we originally planned. We planned to do this not knowing if something was going to happen. So Vladislav is a brave historian facing danger to tell the
You
truth
could say
to the
it's
people.
about like everything that's done in Ukraine, like for last at least 1,000 days at minimum. Like
Yes,
so,
bravely making your
so it's,
coffee.
yeah, absolutely
Uh,
bravely making. The drone could
but
hit
I get
like, and my coffee would spill over. So
yes, yeah.
yeah, okay,
Well,
that's
let's jump in. Let's jump
enough
into
of
it a
this, I
bit.
think.
Yeah. What the founding of the Ukrainian People's Republic? Why do you think it's today's the day of the anniversary? Why do you think it's important to talk about it today?
Well, it's practically when Ukrainian state was founded, modern Ukrainian state. We have a bit of a kind of historical discussion about how this state that we have right now relates to a state that was founded in 1917, because we in 1999 we declared independence from we declared independence, but other countries like Poland or like Baltic countries, they restored independence. So calling their previous states that already existed. But even like if looking legally, the Soviet state that was created by Bolsheviks, by the Russians, it was created on the basis of that Ukrainian state. So even legally, Ukrainian modern state roots is still in the 1917 in this date, in the 20th, at the older by the old calendar, it's 7th of November. By the modern, it's 20th. So roots of Ukrainian statehood are there, and it goes to this day, to 1917, because in 1917 they founded a new state, in terms that they didn't say that they restored kingdom, they didn't restore Kiev and Ruthenia or anything. And we can count this moment as kind of creation of modern Ukrainian state and modern Ukrainian state institutions and practical realization of Ukrainian self-determination. So it's hugely important. We have all of our history, memory, and identity, state identity, calling to this particular moments in history with Ukrainian people organized to found the state.
So take us into the context. What was happening in the lead up? Like, take us into the historical moment.
Yeah, imagine you have a horrible war that drags on for 4 years, where your people are fighting on the sides of different states that are not aligned with their interests, and which not represents them on the side of Russia or on the side of Austro-Hungarian Empire. During this hard war, there were a lot of social bravery going on in Russian Empire, a lot of conflicts, actually hunger, poverty, just general dissatisfaction with how the war goes on, dissatisfaction with the state itself, with Tsarism, with authoritarianism, with Russian regime, which resulted in February Revolution going on in Russia, in Petrograd, where firstly starting by women's strike, then with strike of soldiers, Tsarism was overthrown and Russian Republic was established. A big part of this revolution was happening by Ukrainian soldiers taking part in overthrowing the Tsarism and establishing provisional government. So that happened in Petrograd, and immediately in Ukraine, we have organizations, we have different societies, we have different cultural groups, different trade unions, workers, peasants organizing and trying to create some kind of center of power that wouldn't be in Petrograd, but would be in Ukraine, would represent Ukrainian people. And all of these organizations, they band together under the flags of Ukrainian Central Rada. It was kind of political, how do you say it? It was political association of different political parties, representatives, and groups that decided to find kind of provisional government of their own. And then they incorporated different social groups in it. So they started as political group from political activists, but then there were peasant congress, soldier congresses, Soviets, trade unions, cultural clubs. Everything was integrated and incorporated and sent their representative to this Central Rada. In this way, this practically provisional government, it legitimized itself. It shown that it has huge support in Ukrainian society, and at the same time, all the different parts of Ukrainian society send their representatives in this organization, and in such way, it became very, very big. It was like twice as big as modern parliaments. Very different in terms of different people and groups that were represented, and very, I would say, very participatory organization that in this day, 107 years ago, decided that it should go forward and create autonomous Ukrainian Republic at that moment in the as a part in Federated Russian Republic. Also, creation of Ukrainian People's Republic was in the context of Bolshevik Revolution that happened just a few days ago, that practically put a huge risk in terms of political rights of other parties and other representatives, and create problems for in terms of would there be constitutive assembly, what would happen next, and in a situation of such political calamity where you don't know what's going on, Ukrainian representatives decided to step forward and create
And
practically immediately autonomous body to represent Ukraine and try to bring at least some stability here. Okay, yeah, I see your face, I see your hands.
no, yes,
Yeah.
yes, no, it's just of the representatives. I want to get into some people. Like, who are the leaders that you would highlight at this juncture?
Yeah, the thing is that most of the people who formed Central Rada were radical socialists who were revolutionaries who participated in the previous revolution in 1905. People with political experience of organizing peasants or cultural associations, and they were like forward force in creation of Central Rada, and they took the beginning like all the most important positions in Rada. They
What
consisted
names would you
from
highlight? Yeah.
Hmm? They consisted
Which
mainly
names would
from
you highlight? Yeah.
okay. They consisted mainly from three parties. First was Ukrainian Social Democratic Labour Party. It's practically a Marxist party that has the idea of socialist revolution in like orthodox Marxist sense of word, not in the sense of Bolshevik, but in the like canonical Marxist sense. And then there was Socialist Revolutionary Party. They were non-Marxist socialist party, practically of everyone who doesn't agree with Marxist interpretation of socialism. They oriented mostly not on the proletariat, not on the like working class, not on the industrial industrial class, but on the peasants in terms of who should be leading force of the revolution. So, and third group was Socialist Federalist Party, and they were kind of left-wing liberal organization that was socialist in name only and took pretty much secondary role in revolution, but also consists of a lot of great intellectuals who did a lot of productive work. So about the people, the main people who immediately got at the helm of Ukrainian Revolution, one of them on our banknotes is Mikhailo Grushevsky, is Ukrainian historian and later member of Socialist Revolutionaries. He practically became a formal leader of the state, and he was honorary member of all of the possible congresses, and he kind of was the oldest person there also, kind of a moral guide of the revolution. And at the same time we had more proper leader of the government, who was Volodymyr Vinnichenko for most of the time, and he was a Marxist radical and famous writer who wrote like great novels and had a huge amount of experience in terms of political writing, in terms of writing manifestos, laws, and so on and so on. And they both wrote like the biggest amount of documents of Ukrainian Revolution and participated hugely in this moment. Just it's hard to imagine, but when the state is only founded, you have so much responsibilities on you, and you kind of don't have a list of things that you need to do. You just kind of improvise and create new jobs, new positions, new responsibilities. So practically the work of leaders at the time was just doing this all things at once, and it was just enormous pressure. But the people took this responsibility and went with it, and like placed uh, years of their life in the most emotionally stressful period. So yeah, they were the two main leaders of the revolution, and they practically represented of Ukrainian state through most of the revolution.
Stupid question. How would what does it mean to be a socialist, a Ukrainian socialist in this like time frame? Like, how does it differ from the Bolsheviks in terms of like what their political ideology was?
Well, I would say that being Ukrainian and being a socialist was nearly synonymous at the time. Ukrainian identity was strongly built around ideas of like social liberation, about ideas of democracy, formation of republican government as opposition to Tsarist government, because Ukrainians were a peasant nation, and their idea of freedom was idea of social equality and democratic system,
A
as
collective freedom.
opposition
Yeah.
of as opposition of those things that were oppressing Ukrainians, such as monarchical regime of Russian Tsarism and landlords. So Ukrainians generally were, if not socialists, at least very socially progressive. But most of Ukrainians were also socialists. And difference from the Bolsheviks were that the Bolsheviks, and they were unique in this amongst other socialist parties, even in Russia, they had a vision of authoritarian party that would lead the revolution, and that kind of would decide for everyone else, for the workers, for the peasants, what to do. And when October Revolution happened in Petrograd, first thing that Bolsheviks started to make is to kick out all the opposition parties from the Soviets, from councils, from all the municipalities, and kind of represent more and more only their party. And in Ukraine, we had like plurality, different parties, discussions, nothing like this. We didn't have Cheka, didn't have any like secret police. There was just very plural and democratic tradition in terms of this. And of course, the second thing that Russian parties were in general imperialistic. They wanted to control the lands of previous Russian Empire, and they wanted to destroy the separatist movements. And Bolsheviks also weren't an exception for this. And of course,
So I think
Ukrainians
that's like a key.
didn't want to do this. Yeah.
And I think like that's it's kind of sometimes looking back, that distinction is lost. Where you had different, socialism didn't mean one thing. It didn't mean a certain kind of like, or it didn't mean what ended up being Soviet. So you had like on the one hand in Ukraine, you had a more pluralistic idea of what socialism could mean. You also had a more democratic idea of what socialist could mean, and you had a less imperialistic definition of what socialist meant. Is that right?
Yes, there's a quote from one of the leaders of the revolution that I already mentioned, Vinichenko, who said that Russian democracy ends on Ukrainian question. It was true for all the Russian parties that they didn't want to do anything with independent Ukraine. It's kind of the thing that usually you have beliefs and you have your privileged position as member of imperial nation. The discussions were in all of the countries like this. Like Spaniards could say that they don't want independent Catalonia, and like find 1,000 reasons why not. And the same here, but like just so much more cruel. It was true for all of the Russian parties, socialist, not socialist. So it wasn't about socialism at all. And second one is that Bolsheviks were unique in their choosing of especially tyrannical approach to socialism, approach of dictatorship that wasn't common amongst other socialist parties. Like no matter what socialist parties, they usually all had like main demands: democracy, universal suffrage, freedom of press, and list goes and goes. It wasn't common demands for practically all socialists at the time, except the Bolsheviks. So the same was true for Ukrainians.
So what that was some of the context. The moment of like of founding, what was that like? How was that received? Were they aware of, like, how did they see their moment in history as they were doing this?
That was probably one of the most hard, in terms of emotionally hard moment for the people in just their lives, because they realized something that Ukrainians have struggled for practically hundreds of years. It was a moment of huge emotional pressure that just gathered at one day. It's important to note that they didn't declare complete independence. They declared that Ukraine should be an equal republic amongst federation of republics. That on the like post imperial space, and there should be Russian Republic, Ukrainian Republic, like Altai, like Alash Republic, Georgian republics, all having like in federation like structure like EU. So they didn't want to separate from this federative structure, but practically de facto Ukraine already was independent. Ukraine already declared it declared that it's still part of this federated republic, but de facto it was independent. So they already built all the independent institutions, and they even practically they recognized that they are part of federated republic of Russian republic that already wasn't there, because there already was Soviet government that they did not recognize. So it was a huge moment, and the memories of one of the participants, Mykola Galagan, who was a Marxist, radical socialist, who said that they were holding their heads down and just standing there in this like line of historic votes that were happening. They first had the vote about declaring Ukrainian People's Republic. Then they had absolutely historic thing that they declared 8-hour working day and workers' control on the factories. Something it was Ukraine was the second. Ukraine practically was second, or you could discuss third country in the world that did it. Mexico, Russians, and Ukraine, and that's it. So they were one of the first in the world to have such progressive legislatures on labor law, and it was something that was extremely exciting and extremely hard. You're doing something that never was done, and you're in this moment of huge historic responsibility that incredible things are going on. Hundreds of years are going in weeks. Like what was happening in hundreds of years is happening practically in week notice. Everything changes so drastically. So of course it was a very proud and very hard moment at the same time.
Was there celebrations in the streets? What was the vibe like?
Yeah. There were constant celebration through all of the revolution. There were constant massive meetings, protests in support of Ukrainian government. Hundreds of thousands of people were gathering on the streets. So that was a huge moment of importance. But also at the same time, people didn't not understand what would happen with October Revolution, because now there is a new government. Now there's anarchy, because the previous government was practically couped, and no authority, no order. There are a lot of crime. There are a lot of instability. You don't know what Bolsheviks would do. Would they try to align you? Would they try to attack you? You see like different groups organizing, like right-wing organizers, supporters of provisional government organizers, Bolsheviks organizers. It was very tense moment, and the first things that were happening were actually Ukrainians formed this committee of securing the revolution, and they tried to establish order. So it was more about like the things that needs to be done, and we should do it now and celebrate later. So kind of like this.
And then, well, how did things go? After once you do the historic votes, then comes reality, right? Then comes actually governing, and they had a short
Yeah,
window.
and
What happened?
it's incredibly hard to govern when you practically needs in the process of governing to build to build all the instrument to govern like yourself. Is like
There's
is
not a
like
pre-existing state structure. Is what you're saying?
yeah, it's like being a mayor of cities that not yet exists. You know, kind of like this.
Mhm.
You need still to form the like bureaucracy, all of the different like remove all bureaucracy, place Ukrainian one, face resistance from the people who are still supporting Russian order, and so on and so on. It's incredibly hard. It's very difficult to do. It's something that needs practically a lot of just trial and error. Uh, there were, of course, some organizational structures that were already formed. Like there were municipalities that were represented in Central Rada, and a lot of people relied on like municipalities to govern. But also, some bureaucrats, most of bureaucrats were Russian nationals who didn't want to support Ukraine. So they would need either to compromise with them in some way or to remove them. And it's also a lengthy process of doing this. And most of the people never had any experience in lawmaking. So their experience in lawmaking is from dynamited the police 10 years ago during the previous revolution. So that's their best idea of how the state should work. They never did it. So in a lot of ways, Western Ukrainians from the part that was owned by Austria-Hungary, the ones that were imprisoned, they were used to stack up bureaucracy, and there was just process of like building up just state capabilities because nothing was possible. It was extremely hard to collect taxes, for example, because like who would who would collect them, how, and so on and so on. So there was this like months of preparing this, and you also you don't know what will happen. Russians tried to coup Ukrainian government twice. Once it was supporters of right wingers and Russian Republicans, and Ukrainians aligned with Bolsheviks against them, and they secured they secured authority of Ukrainians in the country. But then Bolsheviks themselves tried to overthrow Ukrainian Central Rada, and now Ukrainians they caught battalion that wanted to overthrow the government practically without a fight, and they just like took their arms and said like you order the next train and you go to Petrograd and never to return here again. So there were a lot of such stuff that government was very unstable. Everything could happen. And just a month after, Soviet government, well, not even Soviet government, Bolsheviks are threatening Ukraine with the war. They're saying that you should compromise your sovereignty on these points, or we will declare a war. So immediately, all of this process of state building was forced also at the same time of extreme extreme mobilization in just no time to fight off against Russian aggression. And it's still like First World War still goes on. Like there's still a front line on the other side. So just everything happens at the same time, and it's very hard. So
just because of its importance now, like as we deal with error alerts and whatnot, what was the Bolsheviks' beef? Like, why were they in their at the time? What were their reasons for being or wanting to destroy this Ukrainian identity, this Ukrainian entity?
Well, as I said, the thing is they just don't like separatists. It's true for usually it's true for all the like imperial nations, and when they're losing empire, they try to chaotically return everything back and fight off all of this like attempts to separate from it. It feels, I think, for a person as they kind of losing something and they want to return. A lot of motivations are the same that are behind this war that goes on right now. It's yeah, they had different formal reasons for this, and the formal reasons was that you need to stop disarming our forces on your land and just allow Russian forces with like weapons to be stationed in your country, which of which was against like claim for self-determination. You cannot have self-determination and foreign army forcefully being placed in your cities. But also, Bolsheviks tried to reason that Ukraine is a part of like this federated new republics, and it needs to comply. Mostly, it was just a provocation, and provocation that obviously was declined from Ukrainian government. They didn't want to give like sovereignty, especially to such things as to allow armed men to be placed in your cities, because of course it's threat that your government would be overthrown, because Bolsheviks already tried to do this. So they declined, and then Lenin and Trotsky and Stalin signed a letter, and they started a war. They practically started a war, and Russian army came here, and there were huge atrocities, and like so
That's also, I mean, I know it's probably it's bleak, but it's important in considering the context. What were those atrocities? What did Russia? What year is this, by the way?
1917, December
So it's still
1917
1917.
to yeah.
Well, it's
The war
1917 was
started
the founding. Yeah, and the war started
in December 1917.
And what did
So
Russian aggression look like then?
the thing is that the war wasn't fought by the regular armies, but by the militia. So it wasn't like 300,000 on 300,000. It was like army of 10,000 people against army of 15,000 people. So the scales were like this, but also there were a lot less of discipline, a lot of more of maraudering, of just practically killing without reasons against civilian population. And Russian forces at the time were governed by very notorious general whose name was Muravyov, who was extremely xenophobic towards Ukrainian language, and he practically ordered to kill on sight those who were speaking Ukrainian. He killed Ukrainian intelligentsia, Ukrainian-speaking people, Ukrainian officials, and especially hard was assault on Kiev. Kiev was shelled with artillery, including using gas shells, which of course very atrocious if you're firing them on urban environment. And then when Bolshevik forces came in, there was red terror, and practically that was the case. It was small armies, but they still organized a lot of suffering, in terms of these repressions. And Kiev was practically, well, it was the same as city in Russian occupation right now. The situation of terror looks very similar. Yeah, so that happened,
So
and Ukrainian
I
government
wasn't actually.
asked. Yeah.
I wasn't aware that a gas attack happened. I guess the history of gas attacks from Russia to Ukraine goes back over 100 years. Then.
Yeah, I would say that in some way it was something that was used during First World War relatively often. So it's not as preposterous as now, but it's still a person who just from their xenophobic beliefs and from the just sheer idea of terror, decide to bomb like civilians with
because they weren't sending it
such
to a
horrible
trench; they
weapons.
were bombing the city. From what you were saying, right?
Yeah,
They were bombing
yeah,
like residential areas, which is different than the World War I context of like, even if it was horrific, it's different to bomb a residential area than it is a trench fortification.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, so what was happening still, there was a front line between Ukraine and Germany. There was uh, still still was a context of First World War, and it created so much problems. And Ukraine tried to sign a peace agreement with Germany, with Austria-Hungary, and in their negotiations, they also asked German government for practically getting German troops to help fighting against the Bolsheviks, and as concession, Ukraine would uh, supply wheat and grain to our Germans for their for their reasons, because it was like 1917 to 1918. Uh,
mhm. Context of the First
Germany
World War, right?
was
Yeah.
there was practically a hunger going on in German Empire. So the agreement was that Germany helps with its regular army, and regular army is absolutely no match for uh, militia that was formed from the people who already fought 4 years in the war, already exhausted, without proper army structure, without equipment, and so on and so on. So of course Germans very easily outgunned and just defeated Russian forces, and but Germany also had plans for Ukraine, and they overthrew the republic, uh, and that was the end of this period of the revolution.
And what happened to the leaders?
They formed. So what happened? Russians were they got Kiev, and they were moving to occupy all Ukraine. Ukrainians, they faced the biggest problems that they did not have the ammunition. So in some places they have they have like pretty much equal amount of soldiers and weapons, but they just didn't have shells, and they just didn't have ammunition to fight. And Russians have, because all of the like factories were on the Russian controlled territory. So Ukrainians didn't put much of a fight because they didn't have equipment to fight. Um, and because of this, Germany was very helpful. But Germany then overthrew Republican government to establish kind of clientelist state of practically it was an authoritarian dictatorship.
Yeah.
And the government, some of the members were arrested, others formed kind of semi-legal opposition. Semi-legal in terms that they still weren't allowed to govern or like to be in office or anything like this, but were not arrested. And some of them just stayed in the office for the reasons that there still not enough bureaucracy to staff anywhere. Every person who knows what he's doing is extremely valuable. So even some members of previous government, they were just stripped of their power, but they still like did some technical responsibilities in the government. So it was a mess.
And what about the individual leaders that we mentioned earlier? Like, were they in exile? Were they were they killed? Like, how did they, like the original founders? Where did they end up?
They were the heads of the opposition that later would overthrow this regime and restore the republic. So if I would say there wasn't even capabilities for proper repressions from Ukrainian side. So the government that was formed, it repressed some people, but it wasn't like this extreme oppressive regime just kills political enemies. It was kind of like relatively not democratic, but at least uh, it's an authoritarian government that kind of allows dissent. A dissent
Okay.
that wouldn't challenge it politically, but could still exist like on some like civic
And
level.
this is the German the German client.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And what happens next?
yeah. A lot of stuff. A lot of stuff.
Mhm.
First, Ukraine was in process of like really radical social reforms such as land reform, workers' control over the means of production. That's Marxist phrase meaning controlling over the enterprises. So there were a lot of these reforms that were trying to happen. Also, there were preparation for the Ukrainian elections for constitutional assemblies that would decide how Ukraine would look. Because like what was happening was practically a provisional government, and the real government should have been elected at some point. But it was overthrown, and practically all of these processes they just were stopped uh, while Germany had their military might. And the moment Germany loses, everything practically continues from that point with the same tendencies. So immediately, the moment Germany loses, Republican government is restored. Ukrainian Revolution continues. Bold social reforms are proposed. Um, Huge social changes happen. National changes happens. Ukraine was the first country to implement practically demand for Jewish autonomy and autonomy for actually all minorities in Ukraine.
What does
There
autonomy
were
mean in this context?
incredible
Like, um, what did autonomy mean?
meaning they practically had a parallel government. Like
Mhm.
they had their ministries. Like if you're a minority, you have at least one minister in the government that responsible for your minority activities. They have budget, they have taxes, they have their own elections, and they have some territory where they're uh, in priority in terms of to govern. If you're
And they
if you
also had their own legal
have like
system,
a
if I
village
remember correctly.
or the city where like
Yeah.
Jewish are majority, it practically has a separate structure of governance. So it's very ambitious, very bold, very innovative. And Ukraine was in general, in a lot of ways, was extremely progressive state, and a lot of things that were tried at that moment were later become like uh, something that become a norm. For example, Ukraine was among the first to have like this kind of Keynesian way of financial governance, something that would happen later during the Second World War and then Labour government in UK was implemented in Ukraine like 30 years prior, practically. Ukraine had reforms that were similar to German labor law, how it worked in 60s, in terms that there were kind of councils at the factories that were in process of either overtaking the factory and establish kind of cooperative production, or if it's not possible, for example, for the reasons, administrative reasons or any others, they would act as kind of voice that you always need to negotiate with as owner of the factory if you want to do anything. So kind of very bold empowerment of trade unions, of different social groups, of peasants. Oh, in Ukrainian People's Republic, extremely strong cooperative movement existed. Like most of the country was governed by cooperative enterprises, meaning that in an enterprise, every person has exactly one vote on what to do, and they have a separation of kind of profits from that enterprise, relatively equal to the amount of work that they are doing. So kind of a very democratic economic structure existed. So, of course, women's rights was one of the most progressive in that term country in the world. The universal suffrage, legal women were made equal before the law with the men, and also had a lot of different like their unions their organizations that represented women's rights in Ukraine. So a lot of social progress on all of the front, on all, like everywhere. But also, it was a country at war. It was a country that potentially could face a hunger. It was a country in the awful economic conditions, because it's hard to organize economy when your factory is bombed, occupied, then liberated, then bombed again, then occupied again. So
I just
it's
speaking of yeah.
yeah.
No,
Yes.
I just want to do a cheesy Patreon thing to say. Speaking of organizing economy, the
Okay.
Vlad will write a piece for our Patreon members summarizing this. I can say that all funds from that will go to Vlad, because I think he deserves to be paid for his work. And Patreon members will help that. You mentioned women's rights. If you could elaborate on that a little bit more, just because I think it's so important, and as you look back on it now.
Yeah. You practically all of the things that in terms of vote, like women were absolutely made equal to vote on the all issues in the referendums, in the elections, the same as men. Participate in all the communities, collectives, trade unions, everywhere. Practically complete legal equality. So there were no legal difference in terms of rights between women and men. Only legal difference was in regard of so-called dangerous work. So if you're a man, you're allowed to work at mines that use a lot of dynamite, but if you're a woman, you're not allowed. And also like different social provisions for like pregnancy and like all of this stuff. So these reforms were very bold, and I think like years and years ahead of Europe. But also Ukraine in general was pretty much ahead in terms of women's rights and just like place of the woman in society than Europe, because even like before the revolution, Ukrainian women still could have place in terms of like in cooperative enterprises. They were more equal in their families, and in general there were strong feminist organizations all of the time in Ukraine. So it's kind of there was a very good ground for this. But interestingly, even with all of this, Central Rada was pretty much an organization consisting of nearly exclusively men, like young 20-40 years men. So there were little amount of women. There were in Central Rada, I think one woman union was a part of Central Rada. They sent their representatives, but most of the members of Rada were men. Like there was something like 3% of the people were women from all of the representatives, which is still like on 3% more than in all other parliaments in the world, but it's still not 50%. So yeah, a bit later because of this, and because Ukraine already had like some relatively social progressive standards in other fields, Ukraine had first director of company, at least in Europe, being a woman, because it was cooperative company, and in cooperative it's a lot more equalized. So they democratically elected a director woman, and
What
also
was
we
her
had
name?
a first woman officer in the world.
Do you know her
So
name by chance?
name of the officer or
The director first.
uh, let me one moment. Olga Bachinska, I think. And the first woman officer was Olena Stepanev. So Europe didn't have women in these positions of societies. What's interesting, Bolsheviks had. So like in terms of this, they at least for some years they had women in higher positions than in Ukraine or anywhere in the world. But if we are speaking relatively, the achievements in terms of women's rights here in Ukraine were they had more ground, because what happened in Russia was they had a huge of like social reforms in terms of women's rights. Then and then these reforms were reversed. In Ukraine, there wasn't such a jump and more like evolution in terms of women's rights, and it was kind of nobody was opposing, for example, voting rights for women or something like this. So there was more evolutionary process.
So how does it come to an end?
Unfortunately, it's a very usual situation for Ukraine. It was attacked by a shit ton of countries that just crushed it and killed everyone, and then organized a few hungers with like millions of people dead in the process. So Ukraine was facing a lot of different adversaries that fought against its independence and that had territorial claims against Ukraine. Most obviously, it's Red and White armies of Russia, but also it's Polish state that wanted to occupy western parts of Ukraine. It's Romanian state that wanted to occupy Chernivtsi. It's Hungary with Zakarpattia, and it's French army that was in Odessa. So a lot of different actors that were against Ukrainian independence and who wanted Ukraine gone. For Western powers, for Entente, Ukraine was seemed as dangerous entity, and they relied on Russia and Poland against the Bolsheviks. And in that sense, they thought of Ukraine as something that prevents White Russia and Poland being the bulwarks against the Bolsheviks. So they embargoed Ukraine, and they actively supplied the weapons to the enemies of Ukraine. And with German Republic was in close ties with Russia in terms of trade, because after losing the war,
sounds familiar.
They were somewhat isolated, so they were trading some equipment with Russians. So it created a situation where practically all of the countries that were bordering Ukraine except Belarus, I think Belarus and Crimea, the ones who did not fight with Ukraine, but all other countries were hostile against Ukraine. And Ukraine, of course, couldn't fight on all of the fronts at the same time without the same problems with munition state. And then there was an embargo. So you have problems with munitions, but you also couldn't buy more. Ukrainians had all of these like different contraband schemes where they were buying rifles through Czechoslovakia and buying them from other countries and a lot of this stuff, but practically it was still an effective embargo. So Ukraine was in just the worst positions that it could be. It still held until 1921, and only then it was completely occupied, mostly by Poland and Russia.
And what happened to the leaders of the Ukrainian People's Republic?
Some of them stayed, some of them moved to exile, some were killed in battles, some returned to political activities, for example, in Western Ukraine. So very different situations, and most of the people, they exiled and or tried to organize Ukrainian government in exile, or or their own organizations with their political line that they would try to develop in exile in hopes that there would be a moment to return and to kind of start Ukrainian revolution all over again. This moment came, but it happened in 1991. So they were expecting the things that would happen in 1991 to happen a lot earlier. So they predicted that there would be some calamity that would lead to collapse of the Russian government, but they were very wrong in terms of timing. So they mostly tried to like secure their organizations, skilled people, and spread the knowledge abroad about what was happening here. They immediately got into personal conflicts, everyone with each other. But I think it happens when you're suffering great losses. You just try
Yeah.
to whom you put blame on for them. So and they kind of started just attacking themselves for all of the different reasons. So yeah, most of the leaders survived, and some of them even stayed in Ukraine. Those who stayed, they were all executed during Stalinist purges. Sometime some of them even like before, and used by the Soviet Union kind of as propaganda. Like, look, we are so kind. We don't kill these people. They're staying. At least for some periods, they used them like this, but then they killed them all. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know that there's a lot to explore there, looking at parallels, but I know you wanted to draw the connection to now in terms of like social policy.
Oh yeah,
How do you
that's
do that? How do you yeah.
is the thing is that whole Ukrainian history, like practically until 1991, was history of social struggle. Ukrainian identity itself was built on this idea of need for social republic. So I explain this like this: that Ukraine was oppressed by a monarchy, by a tyrannical, personalistic authoritarian government. And as a critique of this, from their experience, they developed that such government is not aligned with their interests. They want a republic. Ukrainians were oppressed by exploitative social class of landowners and big business, mostly landowners, because most of Ukrainians were peasants. So, in their ideal vision of society, there shouldn't be any landowners, and you should be relatively equal, like farmers who earn as much as they do. And then there's idea of national oppression. Ukraine was occupied or colonized by other countries, people who didn't even speak Ukrainian, and they were oppressing Ukrainians on the national ground. So the idea that Ukraine should be independent, so this wouldn't happen too. So in such context, Ukrainian identity itself was developed as kind of social identity of social, national, and political liberation, very democratic, very socially oriented, and practically that was what was activities of all important Ukrainian leaders, from Taras Shevchenko to these Republicans doing Ukrainian People's Republic to dissidents in the Soviet Union. But after 1991, a lot of like the Soviet oligarchy, the Soviet like party elite, as well as like very money-seeking people appeared, and they practically were setting the agenda, were setting the social agenda, and as an anomaly for like whole Ukrainian history, it's first time in our history where there's Ukrainian state, but the one that is incredibly hostile to any notion of social rights. And in practically, people don't notice, but we have a government that is very similar to the one that is in Argentina with Milei, with all of this insanity in terms of let's cut everything, let's just remove all the possible ministries, let's remove of like all of the social spending,
So
let's cut as much as possible. The main idea of how Ukrainian economy could improve is deregulation, is deregulating,
just
practically
just
removing all the checks and balances on rich people. So that's the economic idea of Ukrainian
so
government right now.
but just was this like was that sort of neoliberal ideal like the the norm from 1991 on, like what or is it something that was unique to Zelensky or what have you? Like, how do you I know that that's a lot of ground to cover, but how do we get ideologically to where we are now? Or
I would
does
say that
Zelensky differ a lot from who was go on.
Neoliberalism as idea was practically present from 1991 and onwards, but it's neoliberalism could be very different. I would argue that some person, I don't know, like Olaf Scholz, in some way, like, and his government, the government that was like very worried about like this like credit breaks, debt breaks of the German economy. They're in some way neoliberal government, but also like Argentinian government is also neoliberal, but they're in very very different way neoliberal. So I would say that most of the governments before Zelensky were more moderate on this issue. So they tried to have kind of notice. Uh, they were trying to do the same, but on the slow pace. They weren't as much of destroy everything social, and also they always faced opposition. So they usually didn't pass like the most radical antisocial laws, because those people who are affected by these laws, they go on the street and they protest, and media covers it, and it would be like a huge damage to the poll, to their polling to pass this. So they don't do it. But now nothing like this. We don't have any like institutional influence over what government does or doesn't. So they just go forward with everything. They have all the most insane idea. Let's kill all trade unions, like in the institutional sense, and they go into this. They creating the laws to do it. So
Wait,
yeah.
so what are the laws that have been proposed or enacted so far that concern you the most?
Yeah, we have this laws on the deregulation of labor relations that practically remove most of the benefits of being a part of trade union, remove all of the like social guarantees that your that you have like by being in the workplace. They also introduce 0-hour contracts, meaning that you could be hired and without work schedule, on that basis that you could, for example, have like 1 hour a day graphic at work and be paid less than minimum wages. And it's not, and these hours could change, like, so you're never sure that you would be like financially covered in this month, even when you're employed, something that is very precarious. So all of the like social guarantees that had and social responsibilities that were placed on the side of owners, they were just practically demolished. And the notion of balance between like worker and the owner, in terms of they have this responsibility and they have this responsibility, nothing like this exists anymore. Practically right now, social responsibilities of business are very limited, and what's left is just old Soviet laws that they want to change. So it's kind of a very bad situation in the terms. They also try to create kind of this. They have the idea of creating fake trade unions and kind of replacing old awful. We have awful trade unions, but replacing old awful trade unions with fake ones. So the one who would be
How are they
practically in
fake? What do you
alignment
mean by
with the
fake trade
business,
unions?
meaning created by the government or by the business.
Like
So
a human resources department.
Yeah. So yeah,
Yeah.
literally. So they have this idea during the Biden administration. Some of the help that Ukraine received, economic help, was linked to the trade unions. The trade unions had to say how money should be spent. And as an answer to this, like pro-social policies of Americans, Ukrainians tried to create like fake trade union to redirect this financial flow to practically to the government to kind of go around this. So that's their line of thinking. They also had I think either Ministry of Social Policies or Committee of Social Policies. It's like two different entities in Ukrainian government. They said, and I quoting, "We need to destroy all social in terms of rights of internally displaced people." They were saying that people who were moving like from the Donetsk Oblast, they don't work. At least it was their idea of like refugee, is that the person who comes from the like bombed cities and they don't they're not as effective as a regular person, and in their line of thinking, and usually the people who sit there are people who didn't work a single day on like proper job with like proper wages. Their idea that just internally displaced people and refugees are too lazy, and we need to remove all of the like benefits for them so they would find job faster. So that's their idea of economic policy, social policies, and that's just insane. We have also process of like privatization of health. We want to be as a to make our health system like similar to American one, and it just like it's a lot of
And we're
horrible
gonna have
reforms are pushed.
oh, we're still working on the date because someone had to reschedule. But why don't you give who are the people you're inviting together for a panel on this?
Yes, so I have an idea to do a panel about this announced by Zelensky resilience plan, internal resilience plan, where he underlines that he wants like to deregulate Ukrainian economy even more, and just in general to speak about social rights with my friend and Ukrainian labor lawyer from the organization Socialny Ruch. It's left-wing social organization, somewhat Trotskyite, to speak about their activities, changes in social policies, and what could be the alternative. And also, I will invite a head of People's Power Party or Narodovladya in Ukrainian, kind of socially oriented party that also speaks about the same issues. And we will discuss, and I also will be as a speaker, as social activist and political activist, discussing like what's going on with Ukrainian economy, what's going on with Ukrainian social rights, and why this like libertarian Millet type of approach or Thatcher-like approach doesn't work, and especially doesn't work in terms of wartime economy. So in terms of country that fights huge, massive war, why you couldn't just like deregulate everything and destroy social. So I think at least I plan so it would be on 26, but it could change a bit. So that would be our next
Yeah, we're
and next.
I want to hit on what you just said because I think that it's a question that will pop in the mind of many people, which is why it's important to talk about social policy, social protections, even workers' rights, rights of displaced people. Why is it important to talk about that in the context of a war? Because some people will say like, well, we'll worry about that later. Right now, we have to focus on the war. But why is it important in your mind? Yes, to talk about this now.
Because wars are fought by the people. That's, and people have needs, and these needs should be reasonably closed, so we have more resilient society. Because if you have just basic problems that could be easily covered by, for example, more redistribution, and they are not for some reason, you're making your country a lot more weaker. And at the same time, if you're fighting a war and some person drives an extremely expensive car in the middle of Kiev, and you have nothing to eat, and you're under the line of poverty, there's something wrong in terms of how this country manages itself during the war. If you're both were in the same conditions and were doing everything for the victory, it would be absolutely different talk. But like this, it creates kind of two classes of citizens: one who have the money and influence, and they kind of can buy everything for this money, can buy possibility to not to go to the army, to leave the country, everything. And the other class of the citizens who are bearing all the costs of this war. They're bearing practically, literally, that's the policy of our government, that workers should pay for everything. That government would help business, and when the war needs, for example, business has problem because of the war. Government just says to business, just move these problems on the shoulders of workers. we will provide tax cuts for you. We'll provide the possibility to remove workers at ease for you, and practically all of your like problems connected with the war would be paid by those who work on you. They shift all the social responsibilities that business had on the workers, and nothing like this was made for the workers. Like people who are employed, who are working on horrible jobs or maybe for great jobs, who are practically now have less social protection, and they also have that they need to, to have now the responsibilities that business has. And nobody says to these people that, oh, okay, you're in difficult situation, let us cover like this costs or these costs. Because they say you will cover more costs because also your employer in the worst conditions, or you need to cover for them too. And of course it's kind of it's kind of regressive social policy in like indirect sense of the word. There's like progressive social policies in terms of like more equal redistribution, and they're regressive in terms of less equal, where if you're already have disadvantage, you're forced to have more disadvantage, and those who have advantage are having more advantage. So that's kind of the philosophy, the approach for government, that's just absolutely oligarchical, absolutely neoliberal, absolutely approach of the rich persons who want to defend their privileges and not to share anything and not to contribute properly to the common defense of our
Do you
country.
think, what are the hopes of like, there's not elections on right now for obvious reasons, and that's a whole nother topic. But what are the hopes for actually pressuring for changes in policy or changes in approach in the current context?
It's so much harder. I don't think all the parties that we have in Ukrainian parliament are oligarchic parties. If you want to create non-oligarchic parties, you're facing with huge monetary barriers, administrative barriers, and it's practically impossible to do. And it was impossible after 2014 because of different like party laws. So it kind of creates a situation where if you're sitting in parliament, probably there's some like extremely rich economic elite that supports you. Or in other way, you wouldn't be sitting there. But even in these conditions, during like before the full-scale invasion, we had possibility to go on the street and pressure these people. And right now, like there's just there's no such networks that existed before. Some people are volunteering and have no energy for doing anything else. Some people are having this like a lot more of things to bear because of like more pressure during the work and like more harsh financial situation. Some of people are the activists in the army, so it's far harder to organize anything, and also anything that you organize could be made illegal in terms that you wouldn't be jailed for it, but they say that go home because we have like threats of a ballistic missile strike here and you will be all be dead, which is reasonable, but also it prevents any proper protest. So there are just a lot of things, and of course all the media is mostly report on the war, and it's harder to report on social things. There are a lot less space for organizing any like meaningful protests. I argue that like local elections could give at least some kind of accountability, at least to local government, and could be organized without any downsides of national elections. But as I understand, the strategy of Zelensky government is not to do this. So it also seems hard on this front. So I don't know. I would say that it is extremely hard. It is extremely hard, but possible. But it's still extremely hard. So yeah.
Yes, we will stream. I see a question from Lena. Yes, when we have that meeting, we will stream it. And it will be in English, I believe, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for coming. Join the Patreon to support Vlad's Rook, if I can say. I'm trying to get people to join. but also join us on Twitter and YouTube, and I'll get around to adding Blue Sky tonight. I don't want to promise too much though, because I get tired after these. My back is starting to hurt because I'm old. So I think I want to draw things to a close, so I can stop lay flat. But again, what are your closing thoughts? Let's go back to the Ukrainian People's Republic. Like, how do you look back at it today?
Yeah, I think that it is very important to kind of think about our history, our roots, and understand from where we're coming from, how we are in this situation, what happened before, what were aspiration. Maybe just like by looking at the past, you could find something about yourself, about your people, uh, and find some course of action. Maybe you could find something that resonate just by looking what people were thinking or writing or reliving very similar experience from you, or having some or find place of social political traditions that will resonate with you, with your soul, with your experience, and that could enrich you and enrich you also in the sense not as an individual but as a collective, enrich our people. And I think in this think you it's very important to speak about history, remember history, trying to lie about this, and just learn what was going on. It could give incredible insights. It could help just for nation mental well-being, economic and social well-being. At the same time, I think it's very important to note that even like with all of this portrayal in the media of Ukrainian history as something like nationalist crisis and nationalist being used as pejorative, as synonymous to right wing, um, as usually like Americans or everyone Europeans speak about Ukrainian history, and when you're looking at it, that it's not right. It's not there. It's absolutely different story. It's a absolutely different story with different narratives, with different experience, with people wanting absolutely different things. And looking at it, you could find really a lot that could contribute even to, and actually has its place in world's history, because a lot of things that were happening like first or had huge implications happened here in terms of like especially social progress, women rights, political progress. So we need to speak about these things about Ukrainian history and not try to create these myths and generalize, and in some way try to unlearn Ukrainian history that was proposed to us by the Soviet Union and Russians, and find place for learning something new. And in terms of like social reforms and all of this, I want to say that it is extremely important to also think about Ukrainian aspirations, Ukrainian identity, how it appeared, and why it was so important for us to demand social rights. Why we thought that social rights are necessary for proper prosperity of our nation, for proper democracy, how it was connected, why we have like all of these Ukrainian thinkers and leaders from Taras Shevchenko to Dzuba, who were in support of social democratic rights. Uh, why and what we are losing without them? To think why is this horrible approach that is right now tried is wrong approach, wrong on so many reasons, and what we can do to oppose it. And we could look for examples how we did it before practically.
Mm-hmm.
So
well, thank you
yeah.
for that. I think it does. This you enrich the conversation on Twitter every day, so please follow Vladislav if you don't, and we'll continue this when we have that panel that Lena was asking about. And yeah, this will be one of the regular themes of this podcast, of this stream. Aspiring podcast soon will be on podcast platforms. Thank you, Tony, our volunteer video editor, not video, audio editor, who's helping us with that. Yeah, thanks everyone. You know where to reach us, and I'm gonna go lie down. Thank you, Vlad.
Have a good day, everyone.
All right, good evening. Take care. Ciao from Kyiv.